Hello,
Good
welcome
evening,
to today's work session. We are going to start with a agenda change. We'll be starting with the street naming process and criteria.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Moore. I'm Director of Transportation. We have a presentation for you today about street naming. We've had some questions that have come up about kind of criteria and the process around that. We've done a bit of research and dug into it with a cross-departmental team from the City Attorney's Office, from Information Technologies, who's the current owner of part of this process, a large part of the process, Planning and Development, and Transportation. So with that, I'm going to jump into a little bit of history and background for you to start. Legally, the city has the authority to name or rename any public street in the city corporate limits except for NCDOT streets. And we can work on renaming those streets pending some agreement through NCDOT. The state does not specify a specific process that we have to follow, only that we have to have a process and it has to be adopted. The county has a similar authorization. It can also do that within the city's ETJ. The state does specify a process and the regulations that the county must follow when we do that, which includes conducting a public hearing and adopting an ordinance. For a period of time in the late 80s, early 90s, the city had that same authority to do that in the ETJ. The council adopted an ordinance complying with the state statutes for that within both the ETJ and the corporate limits. And that included, again, a public hearing, notification requirements, and notice to the Board of County Commissioners. That was changed in 1993. The General Assembly appealed that. And without going through all of this, essentially what happened was we didn't go back and change that process through the whole city process. We ended up basically maintaining those items that were in the current code at that time and mirrored the county processes for just as if we were to continue with that sort of naming on the ETJ, although we didn't have that authority and no longer did that. So we basically have a process now where prior to renaming a street, we have to have a general procedure established. We've not located that procedure. We have an administrative regulation that sort of reflects that and has been the sort of practice that we've done so far. That administrative regulation and the street addressing, street naming manual are kind of the pieces that we use in that process. So as a little bit to the process, there are 7 main steps in that. Many of these are highly what I'd call administrative or technical in nature. There's the submission of the petition. There's the review by the IT address coordinator in the IT department. Then there's a planning commission review. A city council selects how it wants to proceed in that. Do they want to hold a public hearing on that particular regard? And there's a vote about that. Do you proceed or not? And there's the notice of the public hearing, as we typically do. And then city councils would conduct a public hearing if they choose. And then if it passes, then there are all those actions that sort of follow the normal street name process about notification of property owners, notification of emergency services, fire, making sure the addressing is right, the post office knows what that change is, et cetera, et cetera. So currently in the process, a street name change can be requested by a community petition or by city staff for any reason whatsoever. We do not specify criteria by which one must have to rename a public street. A lot of the street names that you've seen recently have been initiated by city staff. It's been where we've got names that may be sort of duplicative or confusing. Recently, we did a name change for a portion of Tryon Road. That we've done that to sort of correct that for emergency services. The current process does not require a minimum number of signatures for a petition, so you could literally walk in the door with a single name on a petition. So that is a part of the process now that we have some suggestions for you to consider. The criteria are itemized in the addressing and street naming manual. There are 17. A lot of these are technical, I would say technical or administrative in nature. You know, things like no duplicative names or names that sound alike, a certain number of characters in the name, how directions are included or not, whether or not you can include numbers, et cetera. So A few of those, however, are more subjective and do require some staff discretion at varying levels. So of these, I tried to highlight these in the presentation. No corporate or institutional names for streets. So we wouldn't have a Xerox street or something of that nature. Use of a person's name is permitted if the person is deceased for more than 5 years. They should be a person of local, historical, or cultural or social importance, and they should have made significant contributions to Raleigh, to the state of North Carolina, to the United States. And that usually requires biographical information to be submitted at that time, and we would vet that through with our Department of Historic Resources, with our group of historic resources, sorry. Other criteria, we would not consider names that are deemed offensive, obscene, lewd, profane, or derogatory, of any class, race, religion, ethnic group, gender, or age, or other group that is prohibited. Obscene terms are also prohibited. We discourage naming streets after landmarks. A shopping center, Crabtree Valley Mall Road would be something that would be strongly discouraged. And for renaming or naming streets, we ask that consideration be given to names that are historically, cultural, or environmentally significant to that immediate area. So we wouldn't be renaming a section of street for a particular, just for convenience that maybe has no relevance to that particular area. We have some recommendations we'd like for you to consider today, and that would be, first, to shift this intake and coordination process for street renaming from the IT address coordinator to transportation planning. That aligns with a number of the other petition processes that we have, and it basically creates a single location for that intake for both efficiency and accountability. We'd like to establish a minimum petition signature threshold of 50% plus 1 that aligns with most of our other petition processes. Just also for your reference, Greensboro requires 80% of property owners on a street to sign onto that petition. Charlotte requires 75%. So this is a lower threshold, but not as low as just 1. We would not require that for city-initiated name changes because, again, those are usually coming out of a concern for emergency services. One thing we'd like for you to also consider is that staff would notify council of all street name petitions that we receive, whether they meet the threshold or not. We would notify you through the manager's update. Council then could consider to determine whether or not they wanted to proceed with a street name process by waiving that minimum signature requirement and is moving straight ahead to establish a public hearing for the street naming process. One of the other things that we did consider, and this was considered a while back when the process was transferred from planning to information technologies, and that is to remove the Planning Commission review step. Planning Commission does help daylight potential controversies and vet a number of these things. It basically gets a lot of the hard work out of the way. But in many ways, those are going to be duplicative of the same processes that City Council is going to go through with the public hearing process. That's not required by public law, and it does help a street naming process move more quickly to City Council. Further recommendations include that we would maintain the requirement not to require a petitioner to specify a reason to name the street. A petitioner could offer that reason, but we would not require that particular reason. We should also not limit a petitioner's ability to seek a renaming for certain reasons or certain criteria. So next steps, we'd like for you to direct staff to prepare modifications to the street name change process to reflect those adjustments in the city code and explicitly adopt a process for renaming. We would bring those back to you as quickly as we could. We'd also reflect those modifications in the addressing and street naming manual and in the administrative regulation to be known in the future as an administrative policy. So we would bring those back to you just as quickly as we could, and we think we could do that within a couple of weeks. I will also mention that there is a street that is already in process that came in through petition. Acock Street is already in that process right now. It will continue along its path, but we, again, for the future, we'd like to suggest those recommendations and move these things, again, as expeditiously to the councils as we can. So with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions you have.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for staff? Counselor Knight? You're muted.
Thank you, Mayor and Mr. Moore, for the presentation. I appreciate it, and I ask y'all to look into this, and I appreciate you doing that in a comprehensive way. I guess it is timely a bit, since it does say, you said on page 7, we have not located an adopted procedure for the city, so we don't have one now, and so I appreciate y'all bringing recommendations forward for us to, I guess, implement a procedure, adopt a procedure, formal procedure to go forward. So I'm glad we can do that, and we'll do that. I just want to make sure, though, there's no criteria for giving a reason to rename a street. There's criteria for what a street name can be, but no criteria for why someone would want to rename. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay. And your recommendation is for that to continue, that you do not have to have a reason to rename it?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Okay, great. Okay. And then, just to be clear, this would for it to formally, the name to be changed on a street, it would take a majority council approval.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Under the recommended procedure. Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have. I support the recommendations that are brought forward by Mr. Moore and the department. So thank you all for doing this.
Yep, Michael, if you could bring this back to the full council, there's consensus on the recommendations that you have made.
Certainly, we'll do that as expeditiously as possible and try to get it back at the next available, just as soon as we can. So.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, our next item on the agenda is the community engagement follow-up. We'll hear from Linda Jones and Mickey Fern.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the Council. I'm Linda Jones, Community Engagement Administrator in Housing and Neighborhoods. And I'd also like to personally welcome Councilor Fort to the Council as well. I haven't had a chance to meet you, but welcome. So we were before you the last time on June the 9th when our consultant, Mickey Fern, gave a scope of services and his vision of what the engagement process would look like as he goes through this 10-month process. So today he is here to give you the findings of his stakeholder analysis, his communications plan, and next steps. So I will introduce to you again Mickey Fern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, Mickey. Thanks for being with us today.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Again, thank you for trusting me with this really interesting project. It's amazing how much I've learned in the last month about things I thought I knew about that I didn't know about. But so I'm going to share with you what I've been engaged in up to now, some of the revelations I've had, and some thoughts about how we might move forward. So there's a presentation. There it is. So where's the forward thing? The what? Well, the keyboard talking. Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. So with whom I've spent time and from whom I have learned and it's well over 60 hours. I didn't want to claim 100 hours because if somebody asked me to account for the hours, I'd have to go back through the calendar and look at all of that stuff. But I've engaged in a lot of conversations over the last month. The CACs and their leaders. I'm meeting with the Mordecai CAC tonight. I'm meeting with District A in September. I've been meeting with the residents who have asked me to meet with them individually, community organizations. I've met with several city department heads, I think about 8. I met with the city community engagement team. I've met with all of the city councilors except one. And I've spent a lot of time talking to city staff to get their ideas about what we're doing. Now, I should say that I turned this presentation in last Friday, and I've had lots of revelations and lots of thoughts. So this is not the sequence I would have chosen, but we couldn't get that presentation in, so it may seem a little bit disjointed, but I think it's going to be okay. All right. So what are we learning? One is, and I've been talking to people all over the country about this, is looking at the difference between community engagement as an organizational value and being in the heart of the organization, as opposed to community engagement trying to fight its way into the homeostatic state of the organization. So community engagement as an organizational value has to live in the heart of the organization. It is evident in all the organization's policies, transactions, decisions, and activities. When it's a set of disparate and loosely connected ideas, it sort of bounces off the homeostatic state, or it becomes uneven, or it becomes uncertain. So one of the things we need to talk about, and we need to talk about how we do that, is to make sure that community engagement is something that's in the heart of the organization, not something we see as peripheral to our work. I mean, I think that there are lots of people I've talked to talk about, based on the kind of work they're doing, they don't have time to think about community engagement. And as I will state later, I think community engagement is the reason for our work. Okay, so this is just one of these things that and I believe this even more than I ever have. You can't solve a problem until you realize you're part of the problem you're trying to solve. And that's true with people who've been involved in CACs, and that's true with the city council, and that's true with city staff, and that's true with department heads, that there's a lot of stuff going on that we're trying to fix without understanding what part we are playing in the problem that we're trying to fix. And I'm going to be talking to all of the different groups about that and about how they see how they are impacting or not impacting the community engagement process. Okay. For every act of creativity, there's an act of destruction, and I think you've heard me say this before, but in the conversations that I've been having with people, it's kind of very interesting that people kind of want to go back to the way it was before. We don't know what we're getting to. We know what we had, but in this kind of situation, people seem to be focusing more on what they will lose rather than focusing on the possibilities. And so what I want to try to do is to create something that's aspirational, where people are excited about the possibilities, not committed to going back to the homeostatic state. All right, so we're in something called a muddle period. And I've had to deal with this in several organizations that I've been involved in, certainly the city of Seattle, where you have a current state and all of a sudden you decide to do something new. And when you decide to do something new, your productivity suffers because it's new, because you don't have experience with it. It's during that muddle period that people who had power in the previous state will articulate, you see, it's not working. We need to go back to the way it was before. And we're sort of in that muddle period right now. We're not what we were. We're not what we were. We're not what we're going to be. We're in the midst of this transformation, and at some point, we will make gradual progress toward the new vision.
This is what the leadership moment looks
another
like.
thing
You have a group of people who start on a journey, and you see that group of people in that circle, and the arrows represent the diversity of people, and it's always diverse group of people. I don't care if it happens to be one ethnic group or one gender, one age, it doesn't matter. There's still going to be diversity in that group. There's a saying that says groups that don't have minority groups create them. So at any rate, a whole group of people start on this journey. And we've talked about this before. We've talked about fictional attraction.
On this, so we can't hear you. I'm going to ask our IT team to kind of check and see what's happening.
Can you tell me at what point it was really unclear so I can go back? Or was the whole thing unclear?
No, it just started.
Okay.
Probably go back to the last slide.
Is that right? Okay. All right. Let me see if I can go back. The leadership moment. Oh, I think I know what the problem is. This is a slide that I narrated for a class, and it's somehow in there. So I don't think that this is going to happen except for this slide. Yeah. So I'm going to change the slide, but the slide's not changing for some reason.
At some point. This is what the.
Okay. All right.
So,
okay.
In that moment.
So when I talk about this leadership moment, I don't mean to suggest that everybody is negative about this.
Mickey, it's continuing to occur.
Those slides. All right. Let me know if it's happening on this one. Is it still happening? Is it still happening?
No, it's not.
Okay. All right. So, a bunch of this work is going to be based on human behavior and how the relationships work. And on the leadership moment slide, what I was basically saying is you get to this moment where there's anger and frustration and fear and disappointment. And so that people, when they're in that moment, either decide to quit, they decide to blame people. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that's going on there. And there's some of that that's going on, but is not characterizing the conversations that I'm having on a day-to-day basis. People seem to be optimistic and sort of aspirational, but at the same time, they're complaining about things. There's an awful lot of blame in this situation. So this slide is a slide I created in doing some of this work called victimization entitlement. And the reason I'm sharing this is because I think a lot of people are approaching this from a kind of victimized standpoint. So theoretically, and I know this sounds like training, but I really want to share this with you because it's really affecting the process. You know you're a victim if something has been imposed on you, if you've been deprived of something, if you've been humiliated, if you've been abused, or if you've been consistently disappointed. And what happens when people have felt these things is they almost feel like they have a moral entitlement to resent the people who victimized them, to get even with the people who victimized them, and to expect some expression of regret for somebody to say, I'm sorry that I did it, even though the people who they believe victimized them did not have that as an intention, and probably are not even aware of the fact that it happened. Well, the reason I'm sharing this is because so much of the conversation that's taking place has those kinds of sentiments. It has resentment because of what happened. There are people who want to get even with people because of what they did, and people who believe the city council needs to apologize for this stuff. So when Nelson Mandela and Tutu encountered this in the work they did in South Africa, what they realized is the only way out of the victimization entitlement syndrome, because if I'm a victim and then I act out on you, then you're a victim, and now we have two victims in intractable positions who don't want to talk to each other, and you have this thing called reciprocal victimization. The only way to get past that is transcendence, forgiveness, and emptying. And that's to be committed to a future, to sort of understand that those things happen, and we're not trying to say that those things didn't happen, and we're not trying to say that those things weren't hurtful. But the reality is we can't make progress living with the resentment, with the need to get even, and for people to expect apologies from people who don't believe they did anything to anybody. So I really want to share this because this is a great part of the conversations I'm having. And what I want to try to do is to get people to try to transcend those things. I mean, there's little we can do about the past. But the reality is we can move forward, and that's why I'm looking forward to this transcendence, forgiveness, and this emptying. All right, capacity building, and here's a conclusion I've certainly come to. We all need capacity building. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time now, and I can't tell you how much I've learned in the last month about the dynamics of what's going on, the structure of what's going on. So we have an obligation to increase our understanding of the potential and possibilities of inclusionary participatory public engagement, about how race affects it, how how economic status affects it and all those other things. But the reality is that I believe the council probably needs some training about community engagement to bring some new thoughts and ideas to find ways to be able to transcend the difficulties that we're having now. I believe city staff needs training about a new way of looking at public engagement, and that residents do. And I'm willing to create that training to engage other people in it if people decide that they want it. But I really believe we need to build the community engagement IQ of the council, the staff, and residents. So I've identified 4 areas that we need to work on. The first area is analysis and assessment, and that is how are we doing, what are we doing? And then another one is the work plan. What is it that we're going to do? What's the strategy? How are we going to move forward? The third area is creativity and innovation, because I'm finding that even though we're trying to improve the process, I don't think we're being very creative or innovative about ways that we get citizens to gather and come together and to engage. And the fourth is about facilitating the relationships. And typically in this work, the 2 areas that dominate are the analysis and assessment and the work plan. Let's just do something. Let's just get something done. But it's about getting something done prior to the time that we really understand what the problem is and what the possibilities are. So I'm going to go through these things, hopefully if these slides are in the same place individually. All right. Creativity and organization. I mean, creativity and innovation. There's just a lot of wasted talent, creativity, and energy as it relates to residents, and I think people who want to get involved and people who have ideas, and staff. That I think that staff is always willing to do the bidding of the council and certainly the bidding of the city manager, but I'm not seeing the creativity and innovation I think it's going to take to be able to do this. These things in community engagement don't exist in anybody's function. A lot of the things that we need to do in creating inclusive community engagement are nobody's job, and so therefore those things go undone. So we have to create a sense of collaboration. We have to distinguish between meetings and gatherings, and meetings are certainly a part of the ritual of the planning process and the project development process. But gatherings are really what I believe makes democracy special. I think one of the things that we're all suffering from right now is we have this great need for community and we have this great need for kinship, and we can't get it together. And I believe the more we create innovative and creative ways for residents and citizens to gather, I think the more they will want to be consistently involved. I mentioned internal and external collaborations. I've mentioned this before. We need a civic innovation system where when citizens have ideas, those ideas have some place to go and they can be considered seriously. And then maybe creating a funding mechanism that may be privately funded, or if the council decides it's a priority, funded by government. The real danger is that the future becomes an extension of the past. And by the way, I saw a report that was done in, I believe it was 2004, and I meant to bring it with me so I could actually cite the people who did it. And the report was a masterpiece of community engagement. They stated everything in that report, I think, that needed to happen to make community engagement special in the city of Raleigh. But the report exists, but there's very little evidence that anything happened because of it. And so one of the questions I'm having to ask is, when people make those kinds of contributions, what is it about the structure, the culture, what is it about the organization that keeps people from taking it seriously? And I think it's probably, again, the draw of the homeostatic state. And then there's a sense of urgency. There are some people who want this done now. And they're saying, you know, time is going by and we're wasting time and decisions are being made. But I want to caution us, when the CACs were defunded, there was an awful lot of emotion. And anytime you have emotion, you have reaction. but you don't necessarily want to make decisions based on the reaction. You want to make a decision based on a thoughtful process that you go through to create an effective response. And I think a part of this sense of urgency is that there are people wanting something to happen faster than the time it can, even though I believe there are things we can be working on and things we will be working on. And I hope to get some ideas about those kinds of things and talking to all the groups I'm talking to. All right, so I met with the community engagement team, Linda's team, and found them, and I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to put anybody in a bad position, but found them unbelievable. I found them creative, energetic, collaborative, committed, helpful, knowledgeable, and I almost started to refer to them euphemistically as like electrons. And you see this little model up here. You've got a nucleus that's got protons and neutrons in it that balance the atom, but you've got these special people in the organization who are so committed to community engagement, but have not necessarily had an opportunity to do the things that they want to do. So I'm kind of excited about this with permission to start working with this group of people to begin to take advantage of that creativity, that energy, their collaborative nature, their commitment, their desire to be helpful, and their knowledge. And I think there are lots of ways we can do that, from planning the teams to actually planning activities. But of course, that permission has to come from the council and the city manager to be able to do that. We have to be careful in doing this work that we don't trade one set of problems for the other. We talk about inclusionary democracy, and that's where stakeholders are engaged in design, delivery, evaluation of programs and services. And we have exclusionary democracy, where stakeholders abdicate their responsibility for engagement and then criticize the organizations for their behavior, even though they did not engage. And exclusionary democracies become regulatory and want to limit the number of things that people do, and inclusionary democracies become enabling, and they're excited about working with organizations. And again, going back to that homeostatic state, I just want to make sure that if we went to the other extreme, if we went back or we went to the other extreme, we would simply trade one set of problems for the other. All right, the work plan. Do we have a community engagement strategy? We're asking departments to fill out surveys. I think the survey needs to be approved by the city manager's office. It's been submitted, but departments need to complete some kind of narrative about what the most powerful contribution is they can make toward community engagement. First of all, to understand how they engage the community, and there's some departments that don't think they do. But we know that community engagement is everything from the thousands of transactions that go on between citizens and government to special activities and projects and those kinds of things. So we want to get back from departments how they think they can make the most powerful contribution to creating this community engagement process. Now, we may get things back from the department that indicate that they don't think that they have that kind of responsibility, but the reality is getting these things from the department will at least let us know how people are thinking about community engagement. The work plan has to include what activities we're going to initiate. I was going to do something with young people, but because of the COVID problems, I had the Caldwell Fellows at North Carolina State who were going to work on engaging young people and figuring out community engagement for young people, but that's been affected by the COVID stuff, so that's not happening as quickly, and that's also true with some other things. Okay, how we increase our capacity, there needs to be capacity building, and does whatever plan we create include engaging residents and community organizations as co-creators? And the work plan is what everybody is waiting for. And the work plan will always be a plan in progress. As we talk to people, as they suggest other things, the work plan will necessarily change. It's sort of a moving, growing document. Relationships, and this becomes really important. In a place where values are not clearly articulated, if the city has not clearly articulated what its value around community engagement is, then people will substitute their personal values in that vacuum. So if it is if it's ambiguous, then people in the community will fill the ambiguity. So we have to create real values, and those values need to be clearly articulated, and they need to be and then people need to be held accountable for that. The one thing I've had to do in the process of doing this is certainly to assume positive intent. Whenever I'm talking to anybody, I'm not going to get trapped in who said what or who did what. I'm going to assume that everybody I'm talking to is talking to me because they have positive intent, even though their language may not reflect that. Trust is a huge issue. I had so many people say they don't trust the council, and I don't know exactly what that means, but it doesn't seem like they don't trust this council. Their whole group of people didn't trust the last council, and probably a whole bunch of people didn't trust the council before that. So there's something happening where residents and some of these people involved in the organizations have decided that they don't trust. And where there is no trust, then you have people speculating about people's motives. But that's when I go back to assuming positive intent. The whole victimization thing, people feeling victimized. And then something I'm grappling with just in the world period is the amount of unevenness that exists around community engagement from CACs that had like 100,000 people and CACs that have 50 people. So the unevenness creates a situation where I don't think residents know what to expect. I don't think they know how to engage. There's unevenness in terms of the practices and the procedures. There's unevenness in terms of the language. So my sense is that we really have to deal with this sense of unevenness, and that's part of that capacity building thing where people really understand what we're trying to do. And then looking at these populations, these are marketing populations. We have a group of people we could call aware users, and those are the people who engage, and they consistently engage, and they're serious about citizenship, and they're serious about stewardship. And then there were non-users. Those are people who know what's going on, but for some reason don't engage. And there's a group of people called non-aware non-users who don't engage and don't get involved either. They don't know what's going on and they don't get engaged. So if we were a marketing company, we want to maintain our aware users, but we want to make our aware non-users use. What is it that we can do that will get them to be able to calculate a return on investment, that will get them to engage in public process? And how do we make the non-aware non-users aware? And how do we also get them, what do we do to motivate them to get engaged? All right, so assessment. The questions are, who is responsible for assessing the impact of community engagement activities? I'm not sure I have the answer to that question. How are we doing with our current community engagement activities? How do we know? What metrics do we use? Are our activities and processes reflective of the demographics of our community? And what we want to be careful is that we don't get stuck in the assessment where we're consistently describing a problem or talking about how we're doing it, but we're not doing anything about it. But I'm not sure whose responsibility it is in the city to do the assessment work. I don't think that's one of those things that seems to fall between departments. So these are the values. When I was talking to people and I beginning to think, what are the values we really need to articulate? Trust, equity in terms of ethnic and cultural and demographic equity, but equity also in terms of building up trust. Transparency becomes critically important, and there's just a lot of people who are complaining that they don't feel that their government is transparent. I'm just reflecting on what people said. I'm not making an accusation. how we communicate. There are lots of people talking about they have things that go in a black hole and never come out, that they make suggestions, that they talk to council people, they talk to city staff, and they give people this information, and for some reason stuff never gets back. And I don't know if that's reality. I don't know if that's true or not, but the reality is something we need to pay attention to. And I also wanted to mention my communication. I had mentioned that I was going to create a website, which I hope will be up soon. My daughter just got back from Chicago today because my daughter was having some medical problems, and she was the one who was doing the website for me, but we understand what's going on with her, and I think she'll be able to get back to that. So I'm hopeful that the website will be up on next week. On the website will be what I'm engaged in, who I'm talking to, stuff I've read, the things I've learned from other municipalities, that there'll be a link on my website, and I think we're going to link it to the communications website. So again, other values: credibility, inclusion, healing. Healing becomes critical because in the context of making these decisions, people hurt people, whether they know they're hurting them or not. And if these people don't heal, it gets back into that victimization thing. And of course, maybe the most important value is the value of continuous learning, that we continue to learn how to powerfully engage residents. Managing our ecosystem, this is a model of ecologistics. So when we're talking about community engagement, we're talking about social stuff, economic stuff, political stuff, legal stuff, ecological stuff, technical stuff. And so I don't know how many of you have seen a documentary called The Biggest Little Farm, but the reality is that human ecosystems are the same as environmental ecosystems. And in The Biggest Little Farm, they say in order for an ecosystem to survive, there are these 5 things that are part of it: diversity, order, randomness, chaos, and adaptability. Well, we've got diversity, right? And it's not whether diversity is good or bad, diversity just is. And that's not only diversity in terms of ethnicity and culture, but the approaches we use to do our work. And then there has to be order. And then, and we are certainly seeing this right now, in the process of ecosystems, whether they're human or whether they're natural, randomness and chaos occur. And we're sort of in that randomness and chaos cycle. And there are those people who will exploit the randomness and the chaos in their own interests. As long as we can keep things chaotic, then that benefits some people. But with the randomness and chaos, the most important thing we need to do is to adapt. And that adaptability, again, doesn't necessarily mean reacting. It means understanding what the situations are and creating strategical, well-thought-out responses to those things. And I'm not sure whose job this is either. All right, so I thought, let's take a fresh look at the evolution of community engagement. In change work, what I hear is that people typically talk about what will happen if we don't. What are the threats to our society if we don't do something, if we don't end racism, if we don't end classism? We talk about what will happen if we don't. And I think we need to stop talking about what will happen if we don't and start talking about what will happen if we do. Let's let aspiration, not frustration, be the motivation to address these challenges. Let's focus on what's possible, not what's wrong. So these are things I'm working on because it's helping me understand this job you've asked me to do, that we have to have guiding principles around community engagement. We honor time, energy as important resources of our residents, that if they're going to offer that time, they need to get a return on their investment. We plan and conduct public process that maximize the residents' return on investment for the time, energy, and resources they commit to public engagement. Public engagement is an investment, not an expenditure. And I'm having, I think it's Debbie, is your financial person, Linda, is it Debbie? Yeah, and we were talking about not only coming up with anecdotal information about how important public engagement is, but actually trying to monetize. They talk about how it is fiscally sound for the city to invest in public engagement. And so Debbie and I are going to be working on trying to create that narrative. Community engagement must be a city value. Our community is not a distraction from our work. Employees and residents' actions, behaviors, and activities must be aligned with the values we articulate. And again, in the absence of clearly articulated values, we will act according to our personal values, and that's not what we want. So the vision: an inclusionary, participatory, enabling democracy in which citizens are appropriately engaged in the design, delivery, evaluation, evolution of programs and services. And so we ask ourselves, does our current community engagement process lead us to this? We want all Raleigh residents to be safe, healthy, unafraid, prosperous, literate, and live in healthy, sustainable communities. Let's create a vision and then see what the most powerful contribution community engagement can make toward that vision. Not just have community engagement about affordable housing or park projects, but community engagement about how do we create a Raleigh in which people are self-healthy, unafraid, prosperous, literate, and live in healthy, sustainable communities. What citizens are entitled to for their investment in government, and you can ask yourself how we're doing with these things. They're entitled to access and engagement, quality, value, a cost benefit, stewardship of their investment, responsiveness, accountability, and transparency. How are we doing with that? Are we working intentionally toward that, or do we just hope that that's one of the things that occurs in our work? What is a community? And so what is community engagement about other than creating community? So what's a community? Members are safe, healthy, unafraid, prosperous. People rise above their self-interest for a common good. People are mindful of the collective impact of their individual acts. People are constantly mindful of how their actions, good or bad, impact other people. Members look out for each other's interests. They extend their love, trust, respect, credibility to people outside their affinity groups. Their behaviors align with common values. They realize their potential. They can responsibly pursue their view of happiness without impacting the happiness of others. And they are focused on why they chose to come together to live in Raleigh. In a conversation with Damien, the communications person, we were talking about how could we create a plan that would get people excited about living in the Raleigh in the Raleigh community, not just communicating about things when they go bad, but creating marketing plans and narratives and those kinds of things that get people excited about community engagement. So we're close to the end. Community engagement is a way of ensuring that community members have access to value social settings and activities, feel they can contribute meaningfully to those activities, and develop functional capacities that enable them to participate. And so that's it. And I wanted to present this in this way because we can continue to make plans about what actually needs to happen, but my sense is this is largely about human behavior. This is largely about how people behave. And if we can get people to be excited about behaving in a way that we're making Raleigh a great city. I mean, Raleigh is a great city, and I think it's capable of being an even greater city. But the question is, did our historical community engagement process even approach the things that we've just talked about in terms of what makes a great city and a great community? So with that, I'll stop and see what kind of questions people have.
Thank you, Mickey. Who would like to start? Any hands? Mayor Pro Tem?
If you were just all
right, thank you. Mickey, thank you for the presentation and the information. I think this is a good starting point in what I've gathered out of this, some main points that I gathered. I was taking some notes. One was about unevenness in how the city communicates. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, the way our CSCs were structured and how some overlapped, across different council districts. Some were kind of neighborhood oriented, while others almost could seem like they're regional. I guess really a lot of my questions I have based on what you have is really, I think, more for my fellow council members and staff, as far as Mickey continues to work and have meetings and gather stuff, our next steps. I think we have an excellent communications engagement team, as he pointed out from meeting with them, that have probably been hand tied for a number of years, not knowing what direction council, and I say that holistically, for multiple years, wanted to do. We all know there was multiple community engagement plans that go back to 1990s up to this point, dealing with CACs. So one thing I guess I want to say is, how can we start enabling our staff, or can we as a council, do y'all feel comfortable in giving the direction to staff to start working with Mickey more and developing what groups of community look like in Raleigh? And what I mean by that is, and this is just an idea I thought of, we have multiple community centers that we could use to maybe bring things down to smaller sizes. Overall, as far as bringing communities together. You know, I just kind of want to get the ball rolling of bringing people back together, because I've had conversations in the community where people talk about, well, Parks and Rec would come. Well, obviously COVID-19 has stopped a lot of things right now, but past COVID-19, Parks and Rec would come, share activities, events, programs. The police officers would come and people could hash out any issues or differences there. When I say hash out, from the standpoint of really communicating and talking. You know, we had water and sewer, when they're going and putting in a 40-inch pipe through a community, you know, they would go out, interact, and communicate. How can we start bringing some of those together? And at some point, we'll deal with planning. But I'm taking planning out of this on purpose, because I want to look at all the other things that occurred during some of these CAC meetings, that there was a lot of value add that sometimes our staff may not be aware of certain things when they're out, because the city is so large.
I'm not getting out in front of you, but I had a conversation with Omar, I'm sorry. Omar in Parks and Recreation. Of course, I'm a Parks and Recreation guy, and what I realized is that all Parks and Recreation is community engagement. That's all they do, with the exception of management and natural resources. And he has expressed an interest in making his department more responsive to the community, not just about the Parks and Recreation transactions, not just about coming to community centers to buy fun, but really having community centers sort of be the center of community life. I was also happy to connect the people in Parks and Recreation with the people at the Performing Arts Center, and they're finding synergy. Those are people who are about gatherings and bringing people together, and about democratic process. And for them to get together, begin to talk about how they can do that kind of stuff, I believe that's how this starts to work. So, but Corey, to your point, I don't know that the city council wants to talk about this right now in this particular time, but there is a point where we really need to talk about how it is you want to move forward and what kind of instructions you're going to give to staff. I think the community engagement team members, maybe it's because 3 or 4 of them were Parks and Recreation people, and that's why I liked them a lot. But the reality is they had unbelievable things to say about things they thought they could happen in the city. And by the way, I'm not blaming it. I'm not trying to assert blame for this. I'm just realistically saying it's a wasted resource, because these people can begin to connect things and people and ideas and thoughts, and that's what needs to happen for this to be able to work. So,
well, I would like to see our staff start doing that. I mean, I don't think that we should be sitting still, Mickey, waiting for your deliverable. I think that we need to empower the staff to start moving forward and bringing their ideas forward. And there are a couple of things in your presentation that I think we need some clarity on. You know, you asked the question, it's almost like, where does the buck stop? Who's in charge? We need some clarity on that issue from staff. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, what are you leaning toward in terms of a deliverable? You know, you talked about a work plan. You talked about creativity and innovation. You talked about relationships. What does the deliverable look like when this 10 months is up?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have some thoughts about what the deliverables are, but I think that we really said at the start that to a degree that was going to be determined by the people I'm working with. That's the team of city staff and the team we're putting together who are community people and city staff people, and then people they suggest. I think these recommendations need to come from them. I think that, we need to start getting citizens excited about participating in this process. So when you talk about the deliverable, I think the deliverable is what happens after we've done this, but I think there's several deliverables along the way. In other words, there's certain things that we do and implement when we can, if we've got resources to do them, if we can find the resources to do them. So again, I mentioned last time that the process is a product. The process of doing this is every bit as much a product as the deliverable that we're going to end up with. I think the deliverable is going to be something that's a plan, that's a vision about what community engagement should look like in Raleigh that covers civic stewardship and, all of the things that government does, but not just singularly focused on an issue of that kind of thing. So the deliverable is going to be something that says, if we're going to maximize the use of Raleigh citizens in terms of doing this, if we're going to focus the energy and creativity of 500,000 people, how do we do that? And that will be the deliverable. But I think it's the things along the way that we'll accomplish that are going to be every much as important as the document at the end. Now, the thing that people are concerned about, and they've said this over and over again, it's what's going to replace the CACs. And I don't believe that we can wait until whatever 10 months is to figure out how we're going to replace the function that CACs did, but that's also uneven, and that's a part of the problem. But what the CACs are, they're uneven across the city about how many people they have, and about their bylaws, about who comes and who doesn't come. So it's getting to that unevenness that's going to be important. Citizens need to know if I move from East Raleigh, where I live now, to Briar Creek, I need to understand that a CAC is going to be just about the same, or whatever the organization is. I don't want to say CAC, that whatever the organization is going to be the same if I change my residence. If I'm used to something happening in East Raleigh, then maybe I should be able to depend on that thing happening in the new place, but that's not happening right now. And the CACs are responding to things that people want them to respond to, but the unevenness is a huge problem.
Okay. Councilor Knight.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation, Mickey. I appreciate it. This was very timely. And a couple of things I just want to note in your presentation. I appreciate your, words of caution in that trying to go too fast in this. We've had a system in place, you could say, that has been similar for a very long time. This is extraordinary and looking for a vision forward, and that's a big deal, and it takes time to do it. And I guess we are, as you say, in that muddle period where we've got to get through it and realize that and acknowledge that and make sure that we're doing it correctly, doing it right, listening to everyone that needs to be listened to as we move forward, and make sure that the future does not become an extension of the past, as you stated. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you reminding us of that as we go through this. I also am interested in, the next steps and the timeline. And I think maybe when the website gets up, that's where you could be talking about some of these things to be sort of showing folks where you think we need to be headed and who needs to be part of that process. So I'm excited about getting a website or link up on so that everybody can have that access as soon as everybody else. So appreciate it. Thank you, and keep doing the good work you're doing, and look forward to the results as we move forward in this process.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councilor Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Fern, for being with us today. As you mentioned, you're going to be joining our town hall later this month, and just wanted to give you kudos for all the effort you're doing. A few months back, I gave you a call and had some folks in mind that you might be able to talk to, and you had a meeting scheduled for about 4 days after that, and I was really impressed. And it's obvious you're getting out there and talking to the right people and gathering lots of information, and I think we're off to a good start. Thank you.
Make sure that I reiterate that everybody I've talked to has been unbelievably positive in their interactions with me. I mean, there are some people who are very angry because of things that happened to them, but they didn't take those things out on me. And the things that I'm talking about, the challenging things that I'm talking about, are things that I recognize having been involved in change management a lot. So it's not like it's paralyzed by those people who are complaining. It's just working under the ground and under the surface, and it will erode some of the progress we're making. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying that all I talked to was a bunch of mean and nasty people. That wasn't the case. I mean, there are people who wanted the best for the city of Raleigh, had historical experiences with individuals or processes, which they found distasteful, and they're sort of holding on to that. My issue is that we can't let that festering hostility and that antagonistic cooperation affect how we move into the future.
Okay. Thank you, Mickey. Very much appreciated.
Any of you who want to communicate with me personally, I really want to hear from you, because I don't want to get out there. I don't want to get out there too far and have to get reeled back in. So anybody wants to talk, let me know.
I'd rather have to reel somebody back in than push them to get out. Okay, thank you, Mickey.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem.
I was wondering, is it possible that we could, I know we don't vote or do anything here, but just start looking at directing staff to start working on models of community gatherings for community engagement? Like, what are different models and approaches? What size makes sense? You know, because that's data that's not something you can do overnight. As our city continues to grow, is looking at placement of community centers. You know, you may have 2 community centers, 3 community centers in such a close radius that you only use one of them or something like that. Or we may use another vehicle. I was just wondering if that's something. I know I hadn't spoken to anyone about this previously, but it's something that came out of his presentation, that unevenness. How can we start moving the needle forward to looking at how we can start bringing people back together?
Well, we have a community engagement team in place. What I would say is let's encourage them to start doing what they're supposed to do. And, you know, we don't have to hold back. Well, as I said, while we're waiting for Mickey's study, let's encourage them to start moving forward and bring those ideas forward.
Talking to department heads, they already have stuff that they thought that they wanted to do. You know, maybe they hadn't always historically thought about it, but so I don't want anybody to think that nothing's going to be happening, that things aren't going to be happening. Oscar was unbelievably excited about this. And again, as was Damien. And so bringing that kind of energy together is what's going to make this work. So, and we're going to be trying things and learning from them.
Okay, I see the city manager with his hand up.
Great, thank you, Mayor and Council. And also I'd like to thank Mickey for his work and the continued hard work with our organization and staff. It's been really good. What I would say, perhaps just as an observation, is that the staff is going to continue to look for opportunities to engage, particularly as it relates to specific projects and specific items. We're doing that now. You may recall the planning and development study in terms of different ways for engaging the public and using that as a tool and trying to share that information with the organization. So that work is beginning. I do think it would be important for the council to give us some guidance and direction, though, a little bit more specifically about what you expect us to do. And look, if you want us to look at structures or bring something back, we would need some direction on that. Honestly, this is a very sensitive subject to a lot of different folks. And I think our staff would appreciate, guidance from the council as a body about what particular steps you might like to take next. I don't want to have a situation where there's an ambiguity or an uncertainty about what we're expected to do or not do. So we're happy to work on anything that you wish. It would just be helpful to get some direction, I think, from the council.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we absorb? We heard a lot of information today. Why don't you put this on one of our, maybe our next meeting, so we can give you some specific feedback on how we'd like to see things move forward.
Certainly. And perhaps you could talk a little bit amongst yourselves about what some of that guidance may look like, just so we're all on the same page about the work that we're going to be trying to do.
Okay. Councilor Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. With regard to the community engagement process for the Parks Department, we've currently got our public participation policy document under review by the Parks Board. So this is both a good time to talk about how parks do community engagement. It also maybe this effort maybe makes the P5 document conversation a little more complicated. So I just would want that to be, I would want there to be a level of awareness, and maybe, as we're having more discussions, we get to the point of talking about how this community engagement effort will work together with the formal review process of the P5.
Was saying early is that community engagement isn't a bunch of disparate activities done by a lot of different departments to achieve different ends. It can't be like that. There have to be underlying values. There have to be constant underlying values. So what Parks and Recreation and Performing Arts does, what police do, there are underlying values. And I think one of the decisions that the council should make is what those underlying values are. How are we going to conduct it? What are we going to hold all people accountable and responsible for? And I think that's a council decision.
Councilor Knight?
Just real fast, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just as Councilor Buffkin was talking about the Parks Department, also remind us that, and Mickey, that the Planning Department just came out with their Community Engagement Handbook too, that I think plays into what Councilor Buffkin was just talking about, focused on the Planning Department. And I think that's a good thing for us to item to keep in mind as we go through this larger, broader process, because that is a lot of work behind that. And I think it dovetails into the work that you're doing, Mickey. Thank you.
So to understand the limitations of that report, it was primarily about public meetings and how we make public meetings more attractive and more exciting and more inclusionary. But that has to be consistent with the underlying values that you come up with to make sure that stuff is consistent with the underlying values. But that's a very good document. I thought that was a very good document. And I think a lot of people across the country are doing similar things. So
thanks.
Okay, anything else?
Just wanted to, Linda Jones again, I just wanted to thank City Manager for getting specific direction. Staff is ready and willing to engage however we need to. We have moved our programs virtually with our Raleigh Neighborhood College and our Citizens Leadership Academy. And we also are involved in the training coming up with the Planning Department on September the 30th and September the 29th as well. So we look forward to continuous guidance and working together collaboratively.
Thank you, Linda.
Finally, if you want to start this capacity building stuff, you have to let me know. I'm willing to talk to any city department. I'm willing to spend time with the council and not that I'm the genius about this. I've been doing it a long time, but if we want to start that capacity building, we can start that, and I can do some of it, or you can contract with other people who may do that better than I. But I think the capacity building, raising the community engagement IQ of everybody involved, is critical to getting this work done.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we have the Minority and Women-Owned Business Disparity Study information. Dr. Caesar from the Office of Equity and Inclusion will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of Council. I just wanted to say you all look great in your Census 2020 t-shirts. So I just wanted to say that. And just waiting for the presentation to come up. Okay, so today we're going to provide an overview of the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program. We're going to talk about some of the key activities and progress made by the program, and then we'll conclude with considerations on conducting a disparity study. I do want to thank our Budget Management Services Department and our Finance Department for helping us pull this information together. And also co-presenting with me today is Lakeisha Shaw, who is our interim MWBE program manager. I know that you've seen this slide before. This is our office. Because it's new, we put it up here just to remind everyone where MWBE is situated. So we've got Human Relations, Civil Rights, Community Health, and Equity and Inclusion Services, which is where the program falls. And so now I'm going to invite Lakeisha Shaw to come forward to give us the overview on the MWBE program.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Lakeisha Shaw with the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program. Thank you, Dr. Caesar, for the introduction. I appreciate it. And so as you see before you, talk a little bit about what the MWBE program is, and it's specifically designed to advocate and facilitate business growth and provide opportunities for historically underutilized businesses. And so who is eligible for MWBE certification? A business that is at least 51% owned and controlled by one or more minority persons. North Carolina law defines the term minority person as the following. And so you have the 5 categories listed below: Black, Hispanic, Asian American, Indian American, and non-minority female. How does the MWBE program work? So the MWBE vendor will certify with one or both of the following agencies. So the North Carolina Department of Administration, the Office of Historically Underutilized Businesses for the Hub certification, or the North Carolina Department of Transportation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, or DBE certification. And from there, they'll sign up as a supplier with the City of Raleigh through Raleigh Supplier Connection. So talk a little bit about the Raleigh's MWBE program improvements. So first on the list is that the program has been expanded to include 3 full-time staff. So we've gone from 1 full-time program staff to a program manager and 2 coordinators for the program. Additionally, conducting monthly certification sessions and offering technical assistance to MWBE firms. We do regular trainings with departmental staff, so project management staff, to talk about MWBE reporting procedures. Also development of standardized guidance documents, the standard operating procedures, revisions to that, and some new forms as well that's in the finalization process now. working in close collaboration partnership with procurement as well, and then as we began collecting construction-related data, specifically related to construction and repair contracts of $300,000 and above. This data collection effort continues to evolve. I believe the data collection around construction and repair projects formally began around March of 2015, utilizing more of an Excel spreadsheet. Again, that data collection process is continuing to evolve. Here recently with the launch of SCM, or the Supplier Contract Management Phase 2A, which offers a dedicated MWBE page to track and collect data around MWBE subcontractors. And so we're excited about that phase of the program as well. Some of the data that we're collecting to date includes MWBE utilization data for construction and repair contracts of $300,000 and above. Also recently, beginning with the fiscal year 1920, collecting utilization data around professional services contracts, and then program operational data, which really includes data around construction bid meetings, so pre-bid meetings, bid opening meetings, pre-construction meetings that MWBE staff attends. Also tracking training, so internal trainings that we present to include the number of attendees, and then external education and outreach events that the MWBE team participates in, and tracking attendance there as well. So I wanted to provide just a brief snapshot of the construction and repair data that includes and speaks to MWBE utilization. So you'll see pictured here what data we have collected for the last 3 fiscal years, so beginning with fiscal year 17-18 and bringing us through fiscal year 19-20. So you'll see the number of projects that the MWBE team reviewed in the first column where it says construction projects 300,000 and above. You'll see the total amount that was contracted, and then you'll see the total MWBE prime utilization related to the dollar amount that was utilized for MWBE primes. You'll see the same category for MWBE subs as far as the dollar amount that went to minority subs. You'll see a combination of dollars for the prime and the subs, and then you'll see the utilization percentage. You'll see it inclusive of prime and subs, and then you'll see a percentage that breaks out the sub MWBE sub participation. As I stated before, we, with fiscal year 1920, started to collect data around MWBE utilization for professional services contracts. And so this data that you will see displayed here encompasses information that we collected on professional services contracts for the big 4 departments, so Raleigh Water, Engineering Services, Parks and Recreation and Cultural Resources, and Transportation. And so you'll see Engineering Services, and we broke out the 4 divisions there for construction management, roadway design, stormwater, and integrated facility services. You'll see the total contracted amount by dollar, the total MWBE utilization by dollar, and then the total MWBE utilization by percent. So you'll get a feel for what MWBE utilization looks like for fiscal year 1920, and you'll also see the total number of contracts that data represents for each of those departments. Likewise, for transportation, you'll see that information for services, transit, and traffic engineering as well. This next slide will show the same information for professional services contracts for Raleigh Water and Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources as well. And so with that, I'll entertain any questions, or I'll turn it back to Dr. Caesar to conclude the presentation. Thank you. So the next thing that I want to talk about is a disparity study.
Let me check and see if there's any questions so far.
I have one question.
Councilor Branch.
Is there a way, and maybe in the manager's report, you can send this to us? Can we get a breakdown of your MWBEs between your women-owned businesses and others, everyone else Black-owned businesses, so we can see what part they make up of that number?
Do have that data broken out related to the different categories and what the utilization looks like for that. So yes, we definitely can provide that information.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Counselor Fort?
Yes, I was just curious about the $300,000 threshold. Was there any examination done of dollar amounts below that for MWBE programs?
So we have started some preliminary review related to construction and repair projects that fall below that threshold. Right now, statutorily, those are the projects that, by statute, that the goal, the 15% aspirational goal is tied to. And so, again, the data collection efforts by the MW team continues to evolve. And so as we lean towards the implementation and finalization of the SOP, which will include new forms or additional forms that will actually begin to track and drill down on not only construction and repair projects that's less than $300,000, but also professional services contracts as well, and requests for proposal for other services as well, continuing to be developed as we speak.
Thank you.
Counselor Cox?
In some of the categories, particularly in construction, it seemed like the percentages were very low, like 6%. Is there any analysis that you can provide that explains why those percentages are so low?
And when you say construction 6%, which percentage are you referring to?
If you can bring the slide back up.
All right, let's go back. There we go.
So there was another one. I'm not sure which slide it was that said.
So it might be on the professional
like this
services,
one here, roadway design. Roadway design was 6.17%. Construction management was 16%. And those are actually very large chunks of money. Between the two, they're $27 million. All the other categories probably total about $3 million. So the biggest categories are construction management and roadway design, but yet the participation rate seems to be, or utilization rate seems to be very low. And I was wondering what the root cause of that is.
So these percentages are broken out by department and divisions. And so currently there is no stated goal for professional services contracts. And so this was more of an analysis collection. So for fiscal year 1920, this was more to kind of get a picture of what we're doing around professional services related to most of the subcontractors that may be being utilized on the professional service side is not currently being consistently tracked. So most of the information that you see here is a contract for professional services that went to a prime who was identified as a MWBE.
Okay.
Could you just define professional services for everybody?
Most certainly, great question. So professional services is defined as architectural, design, surveying, engineering, and CMAR, so construction management at risk. So those different contract types will fall under professional services, which differs from other services, which may be landscaping, janitorial, et cetera.
Councilor Knight, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it was stated earlier that you all have the city has an aspirational goal of 15%. Is that correct? And
that is correct.
Okay. And is that for all of the different categories? Professional
yes,
services.
So MWB, go ahead.
Is that for all the different categories, construction contracts, professional services, et cetera?
No. So that would only be for construction and repair projects of $300,000 and above. So that's the only project type that we have a stated aspirational goal for 15%. There is currently, while the city encourages minority participation across all contracting opportunities with the city, the stated goal is tied to construction and repair projects of $300,000 and above. So professional services, goods, and other services, there's currently no stated goal.
Okay, and that the goal then, the 15%, what's that based on? Why 15% goal?
Good question. So the state mandates 10%. The city of Raleigh has historically used a 15% goal, and this points back to a policy from 2001. And so that's what we are currently operating on right now. And things may change as a result of a disparity study if it dictates otherwise. But right now we're operating on that goal from policy.
Okay, and will the study possibly lead towards a goal for all the categories, including professional services as well?
Theoretically, that's what we would anticipate to happen. And when we look at some of our peer cities, that's exactly what happened, where it was able to provide more as a foundational base for the stated goals, and then also provide goals for other segments of contracting. Yes.
It seemed like that'd be a good direction to go in. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cox and then Councillor Buffkin.
Well, I think you answered part of my question. The fact that we don't have goals for things like professional services could account for why the percentages are so low. And so I definitely would advocate much higher percentages. And I would also advocate that we look into specific actions in order to be able to increase those percentages.
So that is absolutely correct. The assessment related to the professional services contract, yes, because again, since there is no stated goal, we were just tracking what was actually being done related to firms who had been selected that are actually MWBE. So great comment.
Oops. Sorry, Mayor, my last question. We can't hear you.
I was just making sure my battery didn't die on my computer. So,
all right.
All right.
I'm sorry. My last question. In our contracts, when they're presented to council and they have their NWBE number there, you know, whatever percentage it is, and we award the contract, do we monitor or track to ensure who they listed is that they actually did the work, and that they're not just listing someone to get a score from the city?
So that's where the site visits come in, specifically for 300,000 and above, where we would, monitor that on the compliance side as far as visiting a site to ensure, doing spot checks and so forth, making calls to those who submitted a quote on a project, just indicating that, hey, you're listed on affidavit C or D as performing on this project. Could you send our office a copy of the quote just that was submitted, just so we, as a means of verification. So between that and conducting site visits, spot checking related to site visits, yes.
Okay.
300,000 and above.
Okay.
Plus, there are very stringent compliance and reporting requirements from the professional services firms.
Could you repeat that question for me, please?
There are also very strict reporting requirements and compliance for firms that are awarded contracts.
Federal contracts. Okay. And are you asking a question related to the compliance stated? Okay. Yes. All right.
A lot of this is new to people, so I'm just asking the question on reporting requirements from the firms. So they have to report in and show compliance. I mean, it's not just, oh, this is what we said.
Yes.
They report go on.
Yes, so you're talking about the contract, the bidder. Yes. So as far as that compliance piece and documentation, because they are actually executing affidavits as a part of that compliance review that we're looking at, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Policy forms too, acknowledging the MWBE policy of the city of Raleigh, and then submitting appropriate affidavits. So affidavit A, which attests to good faith efforts that were performed by the prime or the bidder, and then associated affidavits even after the bid of the award is made. So yes, good comment. Yeah.
Any other questions before we go back to Dr. Caesar? Councilor Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm looking at, I think it's slide 9 or 10, where you've got 3 fiscal years of data. And I'm wondering how far our data goes back and how much y'all looked into, if you did at all. And I'm not saying you should have. I'm just wondering how representative these 3 years are of a typical city spending year.
So the data goes back formally to around March of 2015, where data was being tracked by the MWBE team roughly around March of 2015. And so we haven't really looked in great detail here recently related to other city spends. We do have some data, I think, further on in the presentation that will give some information about peer cities related to, and I'm not sure if some of the spend is in that portion, but yes. So we have some comparative data to look at from some of the peer cities further in the presentation. But as far as the data collection efforts around construction and repair formally started taking place around March of 2015. So that's we've only displayed the past 3 years.
Councilor Fort?
Yes, are we requesting that minority participation be included in all of the RFPs and contracts that are submitted out for the public?
So there is language in the contract templates for all contract types. So for professional services and other services that would be solicited by RFQ and RFP, just has a generic kind of blanket statement that says the city encourages, minority participation, but there's no stated goal. And then on the construction side, for construction and repair, that's where you have the stated aspirational goal of 15%. So we do have language around minority and women-owned business participation. It'll just differ from, RFP, RFQ to construction.
I see the county manager's hand raised.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just to Councilmember Buffkin's question, a little bit more context. Actually, this represents an improvement of data collection over the last several years. And so you may have noticed the 2015, when I first arrived years ago, the program was not fully doing the data collection that we needed, and we started that process, and we've had some fits and starts. The last 3 years, I'd say, because we've been standing up more staff to really focus and work on it, the data collection has gotten better. So one of the things as a precursor to the disparity study discussion you're about to go into is that the data collection around your contracts has to be in pretty good order in order to maximize the study that you're going to do. And so that's really been a focus. You remember that slide in the beginning, we talked about now we have 3 staff. We've been doing more data analysis. So frankly, if you go back more than about 3 years, the data accuracy probably starts to slip a little bit, frankly. It was more paper-oriented back then, et cetera. So we've been trying to make some improvements on measurement before we get to the disparity discussion. So that's why you're seeing the 3 years. We feel more confident about the data.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Dr. Caesar? Have we lost the podium? Okay.
Mayor, just give us a minute. We'll see what the technical issue is.
Mayor, I'm communicating with the podium now, so we're working around. Mayor, I actually have the presentation now, so I'm going to present. We are going to be able to unmute the staff in the chambers. You just won't be able to see them at the podium. So I believe you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Podium, can y'all talk now?
Yes, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Beth, could you advance forward to the disparity study slide? Slide 12, I believe. Okay, so a lot of the questions that you all have been asking have been related to a disparity study in terms of identifying a baseline for our services and just really looking at our programs. A lot of the questions that have been asked have been related to legal parameters or things that we have to do based upon federal law. So I want to just lead with that, and then to say that a disparity study is a tool used to evaluate current practices and to identify past discriminatory practices in the solicitation and award of contracts to minority and women-owned business enterprises. Next slide. In terms of what a disparity study would look like, you have the first phase, which would be research. So this would be a review of federal and state and local requirements related to MWBE programs. It would be an examination of barriers, if any exist, that could be adversely impacting participation. Additionally, there would be identification of the availability of MWBEs that are ready, willing, and able to do business with the city in the relevant market areas based upon both business presence and headquarters. We would take this information from the research phase and analyze it in conjunction with interviews. So the interviews would be from current contractors, also city staff, and then looking at representative minority and female contractors, subcontractors, and vendors and consultants to determine what their perspectives are on our current policies and practices. One of the things that the study hopes to determine is underutilization, and then why we have underutilization. Is it a result of discriminatory practices, or is it a result of unrelated things that maybe we need to adjust in how we prepare folks to be a part of this program, how we market the program, just a variety of other potential factors. And then finally, the study will identify best practices specific to Raleigh. Next slide, thank you. This slide shows several cities within North Carolina that have completed studies. So we have the year that they've completed the study, cost of the study, and the duration. So it's costing approximately $300,000 up to $350,000 to complete the study. Studies are ranging in length from 12 months to 18 months. Next slide. So again, the timeline is 12 to 18 months for the study, and really that's, again, interviews, surveys, data analysis, and compiling any research that's necessary to make the recommendations. The second phase is implementation. During implementation is where we would look at the results and then determine what programs we need to put in place, as well as any policies that might need to be updated. Next slide. So here's our next step slide. Outlined are two options here for the possibility of moving forward with a disparity study. The first option is to direct staff to begin the development of an RFP and bring back a proposed timeline with anticipated milestones utilizing general capital reserve funding within current budget FY21. Second option is to direct staff to begin development of an RFP to release in the spring of 2021 and include funding within the FY22 budget. So I will take any questions.
Okay, Councillor Fort.
So I just want to be clear. The study would cover all of the categories, correct? In terms of everything that's issued with contracts, as well as the price points above and below 300,000. Is that right?
That is correct. It will cover both construction and professional services for contracts above 300,000 and below that threshold.
Councillor Branch.
In the two options available, let me just say, what are the pros and cons of the two, and what would be the timeline of an RFP being created? How much time would be needed?
Okay, so I've got Mary Vigue from Budget. She's going to come in.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. One of the big differences in the two options is the funding source. In order to expedite it, and if council wished to move the RFP forward this year, you would need to utilize general capital reserve. That's talked a little bit more in detail in the memo. The con of that is that we have not finished out the year end from last fiscal year. And so at this point, you potentially are using funding that is unknown going into 21. So we don't know how our current year is going to perform and whether we would need that funding for something else. Option two allows us to begin work on the RFP to issue in the spring, but include funding for the actual study with the fiscal year 22 budget process. So it delays it by a few months, but it allows us to put it in the budget process as opposed to using general fund capital reserve. So that's predominantly the two differences in the proposal.
And if we were to go with option one, how soon would we have someone selected?
I mean, I would look at staff. There's several things we would need to do. We would need to come back to council with a proposed timeline, a budget ordinance appropriating the funding for the project. I mean, we have to go work on the RFP itself. There's also some staffing challenges that we would need to address, considering that we are in a hiring freeze, and so we have been slowly hiring staff within the organization. And so we would have to look at this office, who is down, Dr. Caesar, one employee at this moment. And so we would have to figure out how to utilize staff in other areas to assist them. So those are some of the things we would have to do current year in order to move this forward. And we know it's a priority, but those are the things we'd address as we brought back a timeline to accomplish it this year.
Okay.
Councillor Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm doing some critical thinking here, and I want to be clear about where I'm coming from. I support this program, and I'm proud to have worked at the State Department of Administration, where the State Hub office is housed, and kind of enjoyed seeing that old acronym again after a long, long time of having not seen it. But thinking critically and understanding about the budget picture that the city is in and may be facing for next year, I'm wondering, I guess first question is, why does the disparity study need to be accomplished? Are we under some reporting requirement, or are we at a point where we need this to inform our future implementation? I'm just looking for a little context of why perhaps there was not an option 3 that says don't do a study.
So,
Mary, let me answer that if you don't mind. Just for context, maybe for Councilmember Buck and the other ones, we had originally intended to put the disparity study into this the budget that we're in now. It was one of the things that we were not able to fund once we had to roll back the budget balancing the $28 million exercise. So it was already intended to come forward. It was primarily due to 400 something that, well, actually in the actual original budget, it was for both phase 1 and 2. So the number was a lot higher. This is for just phase 1, but it's still $400,000, around $400,000, which is, not insignificant. So we believe it's time to look at a disparity study to give us a baseline of data and information to make changes to the program. This is something the council has talked about for several years, but we are not under a decree or a requirement. It was just simply our work plan, and it was an unfortunate reduction associated with the budget.
And if I may, I just want to follow up on related to budgets. And speaking with other mayors, they have some major concerns about having to lay off people come January, once property tax revenue starts coming in, or not coming in, I should say. Is that our timeline? Is it January for kind of looking at where we are from a budgeting standpoint?
Yes, Mayor, I'll respond to that. As you may recall, the way that our budget is set up is that we were going to do, we look at the budget on an even monthly basis associated with revenues. We were going to examine our position in November and December related to several key budget choices that the council would need to then make, particularly around a possibility of a pay adjustment for employees, but that was conditional on the revenue situation and trying to see what early returns we're going to get on property tax payments, although that's a little early for that, as another mention. Let me just say, from the standpoint of this particular decision, since the disparity study is a one-time expense, that's different than personnel, that's less onerous than an ongoing operating expense. But the question really the council would perhaps need to think about is this a really super high priority? If it is, you can go ahead and proceed with using some of your reserves for that particular approach. Just understand later, if there are additional restrictions, this would have already come off the top. That's really the way to look at it. It's a question of priorities, and I know it's outside the context of the budget, so you don't know what trade-offs you're looking at. But that's why we gave you the option 1 versus 2.
Could there be a third option where I'm nervous about using funding that we have, when we don't know what the outcome's going to be, I'm a little nervous about using reserves. But would an option be to use maybe instead of 400,000, 200,000, and then budget for the remaining 200,000 next year?
Well, if I could, Mayor, the way the 400,000 is a budget placeholder associated with the bidding process of selecting a firm that will put forward a proposal based on our scope of work. So in order to execute the contract, we would need to have that money in place. Now, what you could do, which is another version of the options is ask the staff to bring back the timeline and the cost and start to develop the RFP while you wait to see about how the money shakes out. In other words, we can start the work. Some of this is staffing capacity as well, but we can also certainly begin the work.
Okay. I had seen a number of hands up, Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Cox. We'll get to the rest. Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, staff, for pulling together all this information. I've noticed quite a bit of backup material in the agenda, and I'm not sure that everybody got a chance to read it ahead of time. But it strikes me that we have some really smart staff who understand this issue and know what they're doing. And so I'm wondering, is there a way we can get started on some of this work internally instead of hiring an outside firm? Even looking at what some of the other cities did that we've benchmarked, I would love to know what was their feelings on whether or not it was worth hiring an outside expert, or is that just something you have to do to have a third party? But it strikes me that our staff are highly capable and could really start to get into this if we could set some better goals as a council.
Dr. Caesar, you or I could answer that if you like. But one of the reasons I'm responding is I've gone through a disparity study before in a previous organization. It's a very, very large data gathering effort. And so I don't want to say you can't do it internally, but as a practical matter, if you're going to do a truly defensible, thoughtful, legally viable, there's a legal threshold in here as well. You really have to go for one of these outside firms to do the rigor. If you think about it, $400,000 is probably the equivalent of perhaps 3, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 people plus some additional things. So we probably are short at least one additional staffer to help do this work, plus the consulting work. In your minds, it's probably hard to imagine just how much work this is, but it is quite a bit of work in order to then set goals that you can then defend legally based on state law. So it's a very heavily data and technical exercise. It's not like recommendations. It's pouring through all the reports and looking through all the contracts and measuring every little piece of procurement that then creates a defense for your program changes you're going to make later. And so the rigor is required. So I wouldn't say it's required, but as a practical matter, where Raleigh is right now, we pretty much have to in order to advance the work, I would say. And Dr. Caesar, I don't want to take words from your experience as well.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Okay, great. Yeah, I would echo those statements that Ruffin has given, and I would also add that, when you're looking at a disparity study, you want to include the lens of equity. And when you have internal staff who are doing a lot of this research, a lot of that bias creeps into the process. What I would say is that once you have a contractor to do the study, the implementation plan doesn't have to be with the contractor. At that point, it may be appropriate for us to look at carrying out this process with staff.
Okay. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I just want to throw in my 2 cents. I think the disparity study is important. It's long overdue, and I would support spending the money now, so I would vote for option 1.
We have Councillor Fort and then Councillor Melton.
Well, there are 2 things that I would want to suggest. The first is, if there's a way to kind of do a split of the payments with whoever's going to be contracted to do the work, since it may take some span of time and maybe do a budget crossover. That may be one of the options. But I did notice that in your benchmarking, you had Durham that did it jointly with Durham County. And I know the city of Charlotte has done a few jointly with Mecklenburg County as well as the school system. I don't know that anyone has had any conversations with the other 2 larger entities within the area to find out if they would. I know there's been some conversations about them undertaking a disparity study as well. But that may be a way to do a cost savings measure if you've got, all three larger entities, participating. But I don't know if that possibility has been explored.
Feeling that way all day.
City Manager?
So I don't think that we've explored that option to date. That is something that we could look into, that possibility. We would have to reach out to our Wake County partners to determine that.
Yeah, I would just simply
and
add,
also, I was just going to say, I'm sorry, Ruffin. I was just going to say that there's consolidated government in Charlotte and then also in Durham County, which makes it a little bit easier for that process to be carried out. And that's not something that we currently have.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could add on, Dr. Caesar and spoke that, and in both of those cases, they actually have joint procurement offices. So they have some of the same procurement people, and that's very, very heavy in finance and procurement types of work. We could certainly explore that. I would say that perhaps there's an advantage associated with doing some of the joint work. The disadvantage is it probably would take more time. We probably would need to have a lot more conversation to agree on the scope and go through the selection, et cetera. If you're feeling a sense of wanting to do this more quickly, it's probably faster to do it ourselves. Not that a joint project isn't worthwhile. We could certainly do that. But the work will not overlap. They'll have to do all their analysis. We have to do all our analysis, and we just could use the same firm.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Melton?
Yeah, I think this is important work. I think that it's overdue. And I think in this moment, especially with the conversations we've seen locally and nationally occurring this summer, that we need to get this done. So in my opinion, it's not a matter of if we do it, it's more of a matter of how we do it. Because what I'm also hearing is the when between these two options, we're only talking about a couple of a month's difference. Because from what I understand, the capital reserves for the prior fiscal year are still being calculated. So there's going to be a delay in getting that number. And then there's going to have to be a budget amendment that we have to approve. Whereas if we went with option 2, we release the RFP in the spring and it comes out of the 22 budget, then it can be built in. And I think I heard Mary say during the original presentation that the difference between option 1 and option 2 is only a couple of months. So in my opinion, it seems to make the most sense to go with option 2. And I believe that in the memo as well, staff is indicating that option 2 gives them more time to prepare the RFP, helps manage their workload, and it seems like the funding source will be more secure. And again, it's only going to be a difference of a couple of months. So in my opinion, it's necessary work. It's more timely than ever. It needs to happen. It's going to happen. I just think our strategy on how we prepare for it. And in my opinion, it seems like option 2, if it's truly only a couple months difference, is the way we ought to go.
Thank you. City Manager, is this something that the county could use CARES Act funding for?
I would need to verify, but I highly doubt it.
Okay, I was just curious because of when we're looking at equity and disparities, I was wondering if it might fall into that category.
I think they would say, I'm guessing based on interpretation of the rules, that this is the type of work that would have occurred without the crisis.
Okay. All right. Could we then have a follow-up on this? Ask you to speak with the county and schools and see if there was any interest in this. I think that that's worth exploring, as Councilor Fort suggested, and then bring this issue back to us. Councilor Branch?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I understand that move, and I will go with it, but I just want to say that I prefer option 1. And I think we've been talking about the RFP since this time last year. And if we had it on the budget for this past year, then obviously I think staff has the information they need to do the RFP, probably get it out tomorrow. if this was a city council meeting and we were voting on it. So I just want to state that please do see if the county's willing to participate and help cover costs and do this jointly. But I just know if we could at the next city council meeting, or either our first meeting in October, we need to have it on the agenda to move. I think the first meeting in October would be great to make a decision at that meeting with the options. But I just want to let everyone know option 1 is where I'm leaning.
Could we also, when you come back, have clarity on the time frame? What the difference is?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Caesar. And now we are on to our 4th item, which is the pedestrian safety review.
Hey, good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. I am Eric Lamb with the city's Transportation Department, and I'm here to talk to you about something near and dear to my heart today, which is pedestrian safety. Next slide. So we'll give you a little bit of history on what the program has been, some of the overview of the spatial data associated with the program, some of our recent improvements and successes, and what our strategies are for moving forward. Next slide. Next slide. So in 2009, it was the first time there had been some national benchmarking associated with pedestrian safety. And if you'll click, please. Transportation for America released a list of the top 10 metro areas in the United States for pedestrian safety. If you'll click one more time, we were very surprised to find that the Raleigh-Cary metro area was number 6 worst in the United States. Next slide. Now, the metro area isn't Raleigh. The metro area is all of Wake, Franklin, and Johnston counties, but at the same time, the city of Raleigh made up a significant portion of the crashes that were represented in that study, and it was something that we took seriously. As a result of that, you can see the next slide. We garnered some negative feedback, and it was earned. And so that led to the creation of the city's Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. It also led to us establishing the first full-time bicycle and pedestrian program coordinator for the city. The sad thing is that we're not alone from the standpoint that pedestrian deaths have been rising steadily across the country since the recession. You can see where vehicle miles traveled reached an all-time low in the U.S. in 2009. And then you can see that the number of pedestrian fatalities nationally has been steadily going up. Next slide. And that remains true even when you look at the data, when you normalize it against the vehicle miles traveled nationally. Next slide. So in the time period from 2008 to 2017, pedestrian deaths increased by 35.4%. While VMT went up by 8%, walking as a portion of the mode share only went up by 1%. And so traffic deaths for everyone else in the population went down by 6%. So there's a lot of issues here in the data. And one of the things that was very interesting nationally was to see a crossover event that up until 2015, the majority of fatalities associated with pedestrians had all been rural. And since 2015, the majority of fatalities have been in urban areas. And so we are subject to that trend. So let's talk about Raleigh's numbers for a minute. So Raleigh's numbers have had up and down on an aggregate basis per year. But one of the things that we're concerned about is the increase in the number of fatal and debilitating crashes that take place on an annual basis. 2019 was the worst year on record for Raleigh. You can go to the next slide, that's fine. When you normalize that against the population, and you look at the number of crashes per 10,000 of the population, what you actually see is a relatively steady number. And so it stands to reason that the exposure of pedestrians, the more people we have that live in the city, the number of crashes is going to go up to reflect that increase in population. And you can see that reflected in the all pedestrian crashes at the top of the screen. But at the bottom, the fatal and serious crashes, those have had an increase in the last few years. So any way you cut it, 2019 was not a good year for pedestrians in the city, and we're serious about making changes to improve that. Next slide. So here you can see a heat map of all the crashes between 2007 and 2018 and the distribution across the city. It's not surprising that the highest correlation of crashes in the city takes place in the center city where we have the most pedestrians. You can see that also bear out in West Raleigh and also just to the east of downtown. We'll go to the next slide. When we do accident evaluations and crash studies, we're looking typically at a 3-year band to look at the most recent data. And you can see the dot map here represents a similar distribution to the heat map, concentrations in downtown, and you can see them lining up along certain corridors through the city. Next slide. When we look at the number of crashes just outright, right now New Bern Avenue is the #1 corridor for total crashes. Capitol Boulevard has historically had a relatively high crash rate, as has Hillsborough Street. However, we've made a lot of improvements in both corridors and significant investments with both the Hillsborough Street Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects, as well as a number of pedestrian safety initiatives along Capitol Boulevard. We've been able to bring those numbers down, but you start to see some of the streets across the city that rank. But if you take the same data and you flip it to the next slide, and you compare that data against the number of crashes based on the length of street, you'll find a very different outcome. That a lot of the streets in downtown have some of the highest crashes per mile, but New Bern Avenue consistently stays towards the top of that list. Next slide. So as we look at who our stakeholders are when we're looking at this issue, obviously from an internal standpoint, we've got our transportation department, our engineering services, our transit division, the police department, planning and development, and the city's appointed Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. We have a number of external stakeholders with NCDOT. And what's interesting is when we deal with issues for transportation and we look at who the advocacy elements are, you hear a lot about bicycling, and you've got a lot of passionate people that are really interested in cycling, and you've got groups like Oaks and Spokes. You don't have that same advocacy bent within the pedestrian community, and part of it is because everybody's a pedestrian. And that's reflected in terms of one of our stakeholders being just the general public. But what's been interesting about this is in recent years there's been an increased focus in the importance of pedestrian safety from the public health community. And that goes both from a crash rate standpoint and also from a walkable community standpoint, because it's generally believed that more walkable communities lead to better health outcomes. And so the public health community has really started to become more interested and engaged in this issue. As we talk about the general public, one of the things that very early on in my career, as we deal with engineering issues, we talk about design vehicles. And for me, my design vehicle was always my grandmother and my kids when they were small. And so that's the mindset that we bring when we try and design facilities, is thinking about people and how do we move people safely. So let's talk about how we do that. Next slide. Next slide. So in 2013, the City Council adopted a comprehensive pedestrian plan, and it was a solid mix of both engineering, policy, and programming directives to look at making the city a safer place for walking. And as we've gone back and looked at that plan, we've actually hit a lot of the benchmarks that were identified in that in terms of increasing staffing, increasing spending, and a number of policies, one of which, next slide, is our complete streets policy. This was adopted by the City Council in June 2015 and currently resides within the comprehensive plan. And so one of the best examples of complete streets that we have in the city is the Hillsborough Street project work that was done. And that's an exemplary of where we've modified a street to be more about the pedestrian realm, less about traffic. And we also have the economic development aspect associated with that as well. But Complete streets are streets for all users. You hear people in our profession talk about designing facilities for 8 to 80. And that's the mindset that we like to bring, and the Complete Streets policy reinforces that. You've also got a number of multimodal and pedestrian-oriented initiatives that are now pending in your draft strategic plan update. And so you see that baked into a lot of things across the organization. Next slide. One of the things that we have done is to update our crosswalk standards, and so we are now uniformly applying what are known as high visibility crosswalks. Some people like to refer to these as the Abbey Road, but these are now standard for us, and you see us doing a lot of retrofits, both with the downtown locations and as we're doing project work with city projects and with NCDOT projects, incorporating these new standards as part of that. Next slide. We've also done a lot of work on ADA retrofits, and so this was something that, starting our retrofits was baked into our resurfacing program as part of our strategy to touch all city streets, and this started in the mid-1990s. And by tying it in the resurfacing program, it guarantees that we'll touch every street over a period of time. As each of those streets are resurfaced, we'll also go back in and work on the handicap accessibility. Nope, go back, please. One of the things that's interesting is that we started this when the ADA was adopted in the early 1990s. Since that time, the standards have actually evolved, and so what we're seeing now is some of the early implementation of ADA standards that we put into place. We're not having to go back and retrofit to meet current standards, and we updated our standards in 2018 to reflect that. But you can see we've spent in last year over $1.2 million on retrofitting ramps as part of that program. Again, and also to point out that the ADA is one of your strategic plan items as well. Some of you have noticed in downtown, we have started a couple of years ago with the installation of what are known as leading pedestrian intervals. And what this does is it allows for the pedestrian signal to give a walk sign before the green light is given. And what this allows for is it allows for pedestrians to enter the crosswalk before cars do. If you've got a car that's making a right turn, you get pedestrians out in front of that so that visibility is better. So now we've been expanding that steadily. If you go to the next slide, we have got these now on tap for over 80 intersections within the city. So you see in the yellow are the ones that we initially installed in the core. The green are the newest ones that we've put into place, and the reds are the ones that are on tap. It's noteworthy that the ones along some of these major streets were also the first implementation for leading pedestrian intervals by NCDOT on state roads. And so as the technology becomes more established, DOT becomes more comfortable with it, you'll start to see these on a more regular basis elsewhere. So as we ramp up, one of the tools in the toolbox is known as a rectangular rapid flash beacon. Now, some other communities have deployed these previously. We're now able to use these. There was a lawsuit that had these tied up for a little while in terms of their ability to be manufactured. Now we've got them and we're starting to use them. What we're also finding is that we can use them as an interim measure. These are relatively inexpensive devices that we can use in advance of going in and doing a more expensive, more involved treatment. Next slide. So you see here where we installed one of these a little while back along Blue Ridge Road at the House Creek Greenway crossing, just below Crabtree Valley. So the next tool in our toolkit is what's known as a HAWK signal. We love acronyms in our business, High Intensity Activated Crosswalk Beacon. We currently have 10 HAWK locations across the city right now. We have 7 that are on tap. This is an example that's in front of the Southeast Raleigh High School. And on the next slide, you'll see where we've got these locations that are pending currently across the city. The next thing in our toolbox is pedestrian refuges, and these are things that work very well when we've got streets that have center turn lanes that we can slip in a median refuge. And what this does is allows for a safe two-stage pedestrian crossing. So one of the challenges with crossing the street is where you have multiple threats. If you're trying to cross a 2-lane street, you've got traffic coming in both directions. You've got to find that gap from both sides. With the refuge, you really only have to worry about traffic in one direction at a time. And we design these refuges so that there's a safe harbor in the middle of the street. that you can take a bike, a stroller, have plenty of room there, and then only have to deal with one direction of traffic at a time. And what we find is that it also breaks up the space, it improves yielding by drivers, and it generally improves the pedestrian safety. It's a good low-tech measure. Next. Along those same lines, lighting is something that, with the majority of pedestrian crashes typically occurring in the evening hours, lighting is critically important. And so we've recently completed our citywide upgrade to LED lighting. And one of the things that does with the white light associated with that is better associated with improved visual acuity. When compared against the orange light that we get from the high-pressure sodium lighting. One of the things that we've also been doing is working with NCDOT to go and do retrofits on a lot of bridges and underpasses to go back in and add these LED light packs. And they really make a big difference in terms of improving visibility and safety. So the city staff also embarked on working to improve work zones and make outcomes more predictable, both for the development community and for the users at large. And so our city staff internally worked on developing what I think is a landmark guide for pedestrian safety called Making Great Strides. And you can see the next slide. This has done a lot to give guidance and creative options for the development community to look at where we need to maintain traffic on some of these streets where we've got high pedestrian volumes to be able to do so safely and maintain the access and provide safe access through these work zones. Next. One of the fundamental components of our program is sidewalk construction. And so it is something that retrofitting streets for pedestrians is something that is a standard element in all of our city and NCDOT projects. Now, on the DOT projects, historically, the city is subject to a pedestrian policy from DOT that requires a cost sharing. So, and anytime we look at wider sidewalks, those are considered to be a betterment as part of DOT standards. And so the city has to pay that delta. We do understand, though, that NCDOT has recently adopted a complete streets policy and has made indications that some of those project costs will be borne by the state going forward. Now, how that fits within the most recent financial difficulties from NCDOT remains to be seen. But one of the things that has been really beneficial for us is that we had $14 million allocated from the 2017 transportation bond specifically for sidewalk infrastructure. But when you go back and look at all the other bond projects that have sidewalks associated with them, we think the number of the total amount allocated for pedestrians in the transportation bond is probably closer to 40 million. So it's a pretty significant amount that was made from this last transportation bond. We've also gone through processes with the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and supplemented our funds with grant funds that's available through them. Next slide. Some of the projects that we've got working with NCDOT right now with sidewalks include the I-440 Wake Forest Road interchange work, widening on Falls and News Road, and then there's a freeway conversion of US 70 through Briar Creek. Now, we don't do sidewalks traditionally along freeways, but what we do is we include sidewalks as part of all of the cross streets. So all of the intersections with Briar Creek Parkway and TW Alexander Drive will all be, with these new bridges that go in as part of the freeway conversion, will all be retrofitted with both bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Since 2015, we've completed a number of projects, almost 3 miles of petition projects, and another 2 miles that are under construction currently. And then our capital sidewalk program, you can see that we've got over 7 miles that have been completed and almost 2 miles that are under construction now. Next. We also have a Safe Routes to Schools program. This is another one that was funded as part of the transportation bond. We have a Leesville school campus project that we have been working with up there to look at new sidewalks and crosswalks. That project is frozen right now because we did have some grant money that we supplemented from NCDOT, and it's subject to DOT's cost crunch right now. We're hopeful that that's going to get unfrozen soon and we can get moving forward with that project. We've also been working lately with Wake County Schools on a pedestrian accessibility retrofit for Conn Elementary and the Belvedere Park neighborhood to the rear, where there was historically a pedestrian bridge back there that was demolished, looking to work with them to restore that pedestrian accessibility as part of this program. Next. One of the other things that was identified as part of the comprehensive pedestrian plan was the need for us to go through and work to update our street design standards to start to make the environment better for pedestrians. And this is one of those things that takes time as the city continues to grow. But with the adoption of the UDO in 2013, the city required sidewalks on both sides of streets. Up until that point, from 1995 to 2013, sidewalks were only required on one side of residential and minor streets. So now it is the city standard to have sidewalks on both sides of all streets. We updated those technical standards in 2015. And as part of that measure, we also ended up reducing the design speeds of a lot of those neighborhood streets specifically to establish 25 miles per hour as the standard for residential streets and main streets. And one of the things that we're working on doing now is historically we've reduced the speed limits on the streets by petition, but now that we've established that floor for a standard of the design, we're looking at proactively reducing the speed limit on those streets to 25. So we've been working hard since we got dinged the way that we did publicly in 2009. We've gone from being ranked 6th worst in the country to now we're no longer even in the top 20. And so in 2019, when the most recent report was released by Transportation for America, we were rated 31st in the country. Now a slight uptick with the 2019 numbers. As I said, nationally, this is a problem for everyone, but we've made a lot of progress to improve our previous rankings. One of the other things I'm especially pleased with, if you'll go to the next slide, is that we were recently recognized by Walk Friendly Communities as a silver level community. We applied for this program for the first time last year and did not expect to get anything above a bronze for an initial application. Typically with both bike-friendly communities and walk-friendly communities, you get a lot of feedback as part of those programs about ways that you can improve. So we were ecstatic for our first application to reach silver status, and they were very complimentary of that program. So if you'll go to where we're headed next, so we're starting to do some public outreach in terms of walkability assessments. And this is where some of our staff goes out in the field with residents and commission members to go out and look at where some problem areas are and look at if there's small things that can be done from a maintenance standpoint to improve the area. If you've got sidewalk that's broken or washed out, if you've got utility damage that's in the area, those are small little things that will aggregate and collectively make the environment worse for walking. And those are things that once we're aware of those issues, we can take care of expeditiously. We've recently done several of these and plan to do several more as well. Next thing is that we just recently finished a downtown pedestrian safety study working with NCDOT, and this focused on the north half of downtown in response to concerns that were raised by a lot of state government workers about pedestrian safety. And so this covered specifically the portion of downtown between P Street and Hargett Street. And one of the things that it did that I thought was good was to identify some really short-term, small measures and long-term measures to give us some means of going out and making immediate changes. Part of the strategies here included that we would look at more uniform right turn on red restrictions, look at improving the crosswalks, lowering the operating speed, and using signal timing to do that. And what folks aren't really aware of is that we recently worked with DOT during the pandemic. With traffic being down, we worked to retime the signals along the Dawson and McDowell corridor specifically, which is one of the ones we get most of the complaints about for speeding in downtown. We've actually gone through and lowered the operating speed on that and are continuing to look at how to continue to refine that as part of our signal system operations. NCDOT is part of the solutions in this. They have a high hazard location program. You can see the locations that they've identified. As part of their program, they bring funds to the table to be able to try and address safety issues at these locations. They have a program that's both for pedestrians and for crashes in general, and so we'll continue to work with them as they roll these out. Next, one of the things that we do on the programming side is October is National Walk to Work Month, National Walking Month, and so we do a lot of programming as part of Walktober historically. Now, we will not be doing programming this year with the pandemic situation in place, but this gives you an example of some of the different things that we did working with the BPAC to look at programming options for engaging the community, getting folks out and walking. Walk to School Day is one of the biggest measures. That's got a lot of support from DOT, and a lot of schools participate in that, and so we've been very successful with those outreach programs. The next thing is we've been looking at transit corridor emphasis. And so, as you know, we're making these investments in transit, moving forward with developing high-intensity transit corridors. A transit system is not very good if you can't walk to it. And so one of the things that we're doing is making sure that our work program for capital projects of all kinds are aligning with our transit investments so that everything is tying together as it should. And so some of you will remember that we had, as we talk about New Bern Avenue being such a trouble spot, we had a pedestrian safety project to retrofit the corridor for sidewalks. That project was established before the New Bern Avenue BRT project was developed. There were several years of lag time since that was a federally grant-funded project. We were in a position to move forward with that project, but discovered that given the acceleration of the New Bern BRT project, those sidewalk improvements would only be on the ground for a couple of years before they were impacted by the construction. And so, as I think most council knows, we asked permission to combine the two projects together so that we'll only be disrupting the community once, and we'll be integrating all of that work together and won't be wasting any money with work that we go out and put on the ground and have to tear up 2 years later. So we appreciate your support on that. There's also money that was set aside in the transportation bond that will allow us to do some collaboration and do extra work on top of the BRT projects. One of the better examples is where we have a station located, say, for example, at the intersection of Western Boulevard and Kent. We would look at options for extending sidewalk down those side streets, which would be beyond the scope of what the federal BRT project would allow, but the money that we've got from the transportation bond would allow us to supplement that. Next, we're looking at developing a Vision Zero program. So if you haven't heard of Vision Zero, what it is, it's a strategy that works to eliminate traffic fatalities and increase safety and mobility for all. It's a different approach to looking at corridors as opposed to specific spot safety locations. It's a more holistic approach. There's equal parts of engineering, education, enforcement, and the challenge is that in some cases it does mean that if we look at specific treatments, we're going to inconvenience drivers, but we're going to increase pedestrian safety and safety for all users. And so that's one of the challenges with this type of program is making that connection for the public and making everyone understand the benefit of this type of approach. Now, one of the things about a Vision Zero program is that it requires a lot of data, both collection and analysis. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing is we've got some on-call consultants. We're going to tap one to look at doing an assessment for what successful Vision Zero programs look like across the country, and we're going to look to emulate those successes. And again, a reminder that this is one of the strategic plan items that the City Council currently has in the draft strategic plan. And then along the same lines, we would look to, as I said before, the pedestrian plan was last updated and approved by the City Council in 2013. We are going to look at options for updating that plan in the next year's capital improvement program budget. So if you're interested, you can find out more about our programs and the comprehensive pedestrian plan on our page at raleighnc.gov/walk-raleigh. Lots of resources there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions for you.
Great presentation, Eric. Who has questions? Councilor Branch and then Councilor Melton.
Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. I have one question about the Hawk Signal pending installation projects. Do you know the time frame, or can you share with us maybe in our manager's update Friday, what's the time frame of those installations that are pending?
I can work with our traffic engineering staff and have that for you as part of the manager's update.
Okay, perfect, because I'm really interested in this Sunnybrook and Walnut Creek Greenway Hawk Signal, as well as having more conversation at some point with you concerning sidewalks on Sunnybrook Road. But I will get with you all on those items.
Councilor Melton?
Yeah, I have a couple of things, but I'm going to try to be lightning fast because I know it's getting late and folks are getting tired. The first thing I want to say is we've really got to get our vehicles mile travel rate down. And I think that the investment that the community has made in the Wake County Transit Plan, as we start to make those implementations, I think that's really going to help. I think some of the interim measures we've taken, focusing on complete streets and the median refuges, I think that's really going to help too. One thing that I think will have an immeasurable impact will be actually implementing a Vision Zero plan. And I know that there was a comment that the trade-off's going to be that we're going to be inconveniencing some cars or drivers at some point. And I think that's fine. I think for a really long time, we, and I don't mean just Raleigh, I think cities in general have inconvenienced pedestrians and cyclists at the expense of drivers. So if it starts to shift in the other direction, I think that's probably means we're finally finding our way to the middle. So my question is, do we have like a set of deliverables or a timeline for implementing Vision Zero? That's one. And then two, as it relates to the pedestrian plan update, I'm wondering why we're doing it like every 9 or 10 years. I know that we update our strategic plan every 5 years. It looks like we're updating or evaluating funding options in fiscal year 22. Is that just because we had some budget issues in 21? And is there a way that we can be looking at our pedestrian plan update more frequently? So 2 questions, Vision Zero deliverables, and can we somehow look at this pedestrian plan more frequently than every 9 years?
So on the first question, with the Vision Zero timeline, we will have that as a task order with our consultant to do that assessment within the next month. And so I'll have to work with them on what the timeline will be to develop that type of assessment. But part of it is to give us that framework for what would be, for a community our size, an appropriate size plan. What does that mean from a capital standpoint? What does that mean from a staffing standpoint? And we're a relatively small ship as far as staffing goes. That's something that we would have to take very judiciously as far as how we do that. And your second question, if you remind me, please.
Did you ask me to repeat it?
I remember now. This is the timing of the pedestrian plan. We have 2 plans that we update on a regular basis: the pedestrian plan and the bicycle plan. The bicycle plan was last updated in 2016, and so we look at trying to update those on a rolling basis. As many of you are aware, the changes in technology on both the bicycling side and on the micromobility side have been very rapid nationally, especially as you look at communities adopting more European standards. And so we had actually been contemplating the need to do a bicycle plan update to reflect that before we did a pedestrian plan. We didn't have the latitude for either relative to the budget this year, but given the pedestrian safety concerns, we feel like moving forward the pedestrian plan is more important at this point. But historically, we have looked at trying to update those. But the good thing is that the pedestrian plan has actually been pretty intact. As we've gone through and taken a look at that and looked at the recommendations, that realm hasn't evolved the way, from a technology standpoint, the way that cycling has. And so a lot of the recommendations associated with the pedestrian plan are still pretty sound. And so it hasn't had quite the need from a technology and infrastructure standpoint to do that so quickly.
Okay. Councilor Knight. You're muted. You're muted.
I do support Councilor Melton's comments, so I want to reiterate those. I do support, like the idea of field visits. That kind of goes into public engagement ideas that we've talked about earlier. So, and I have a few neighborhoods, locations I'd love for you to look at with those field visits in my district. Excited about what y'all done with Currituck Road, North Hills area, North Hills neighborhood that connects Councilor Buffkin's district with mine. That's the kind of things that you were talking about, and you can see it on display along those upgrades along that road. It seems like we're going in the right direction on all of this, and I appreciate y'all's work on this. It just is the speed of getting these projects started and the implementation I think we need to be thinking about, and that goes to, I guess, what's left of the transportation bond, the last one, and then looking forward to how we can help improve and increase the speed of these projects, getting them up and implemented. So just something to think about and continue to talk about. Thank you very much.
Councilor Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple points of feedback. This was a really great presentation, Eric, and thank you for being with us. A lot of good stuff to be excited about here. I really like the Safe Routes to Schools program and the study and analysis that focuses on keeping kids and families safe. A few years back, I think it's been 3 or 4 now, while I was a member of the Parks Board, the city got a grant to do basically the same Safe Routes to Parks. We called it something different. I can't remember what we called it. But it was a valuable piece of work. A lot of effort went into it. So I'd ask that you dust that report off, update it if you need to, and incorporate that into the ongoing work related to sidewalks, if you would, please. And then a question. I'm on slide 35, sidewalk construction since 2015. I wonder if, and you don't have to do it today, but perhaps in a manager's report or follow-up, could we get some context for these numbers? I don't want to be critical without understanding the context, but these aren't very impressive numbers in terms of the total miles. And we all know we got a lot of work to do. Building sidewalks is expensive, so I'm just looking for a little help understanding how much we're spending, how much we built, before 2015, and a little bit more context around those numbers. Thank you.
Sure, we'd be happy to provide those for you. I think the first context I'll provide is that petition projects are primarily on neighborhood and residential streets. The capital sidewalk projects are along major streets. And even though we think of sidewalks as relatively minor infrastructure, they have to go through the same design and permitting process as major road widening projects do. Oftentimes, we have to be able to secure right-of-way and easements in some cases to do the construction. There are utility locations that have to be done as part of that work. It's adding new impervious surface. In some cases, we've been required to install stormwater devices just for building a sidewalk. So they're subject to those same permitting and red tape that all other major construction projects are. I wish that were not the case, but we are definitely moving forward. But I'd be happy to get a list of those projects in each of those categories that we've completed in the last 5 years for one of the upcoming managers' updates.
Yes, Councilor Buffkin.
Thank you. And Mr. Lamb, while you're doing that work, if you identify some areas where the council can help cut some red tape and make it easier to build sidewalks, please let us know.
Nice one. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank the staff. Those were 4 really great presentations and work session items. I think we have some decisions to make based on this. So staff has been given direction what to bring back to us, and we'll look forward to receiving that information. In the meantime, I'm going to ask David Knight to, and I'm kind of surprising him, but you're responsible for the getting us all to wear these shirts today. So David, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Give credit to Megan Hinkle for getting all those shirts and getting this before us. But I know the mayor and also the rest of the councilors have been working hard to promote folks signing up for the census, and appreciate all that work. Just thought it'd be another opportunity as we move into September to promote the census for Wake County and the city of Raleigh. And thanks to Wake County government and our city planning department for working hard in this and leading on this. And I have to say, give extra credit to Councilor Cox today for his background work on promoting. So there, he gets kudos for that. But thanks for everybody. And we'll continue to promote the Census 2020 for the city of Raleigh, and get out there. And it's real easy. It takes literally 3 minutes, and get it done and help represent the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for being a champion on that. And yes, and Councilor Cox is showing us up with his backgrounds. So I think we're all going to have to step it up a little bit, do something about that. So thank you, everyone, and thanks for everybody who tuned in today, and we will see you soon. Be safe.